So peptides have gotten a lot of attention since the weight loss drugs have come out. So like the GLP-1s. And essentially a peptide is a chain of amino acids that then like codes and tells your body to do an action. So the GLP-1s that first came out acted on like one mechanism, and they would help you metabolize inflammation, blood sugar, and that would in turn help people lose weight. Well, now the new peptides coming out for GLP-1s, there's one called retatrutide, and it's a triple agonist. So now it works on like 3 different ways that you can manage like your blood sugar, your inflammation, and like insulin response. There's other peptides too. Like we use a lot of peptides with our veteran community that can help with like stimulating brain function, blood flow, and like basically resetting the brain through the peptides. And that can help them focus more, heal their brain from TBIs, PTSD.
Hi, I'm Lauren Parsons.
And I'm Andy Jackson. And this is the ALWELLCO Podcast.
Dive deep with us as leading experts share their unique perspectives on topics such as recovery, sleep, movement, and the latest innovations in the space. Kelsey, welcome to the ALWELLCO Podcast. We're so delighted to have you today. Before we dive into your journey, let's set the stage. Can you just share with us how we first got connected to one another and what drew you to the ALWELLCO community?
Absolutely. Well, I first met the community through Andy. And Andy and I have been connected, I guess, since like 2021 or 2022 through Vivo Barefoot. And you guys actually sent me some shoes. I love them. And Andy and I just kind of stayed connected business-wise through social media.
Love that. Cool. Yeah. It's always interesting to hear, in different ways people kind of come in. And Vivo Barefoot's been a huge one that a lot of us have connected on. So that's really neat. So let's get into it. So what led you to pursue a career in functional medicine? And was there anyone along the way that really shaped or helped shape your journey?
Yeah, so functional medicine for me was kind of like something I found out of desperation. So a background on me, I went to my undergrad in dietetics. And so I was learning all about nutrition. I had a minor in exercise science. But what that led to for me was an eating disorder, actually. So in college, I had something that's now called like orthorexia, where I would like calculate every calorie that I burned during my workouts, and then I would only eat that amount of calories.
Oh,
yeah, just from like
orthorexia. Yeah. Did you know that?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would kind of like try to burn off all the calories that I ate. And as you can imagine, that led to a lot of metabolic issues that I didn't really recognize at the time. I just was like, my body's hard to lose weight. And fast forward a couple years, I actually got involved in a cult in college that was like a religious-based cult. And they really like controlled every aspect of your life. I actually was in an arranged marriage, which led me to living in like South Africa for a year. That all came to a head. I was in the marriage, got divorced, and through the process of the divorce, and I was pregnant at the time, had a baby. After I had the baby, she's 12 now. I had a lot of symptoms like brain fog, trouble losing weight, gut issues. And at the time I didn't know what it was, but I also had PTSD. So I had a lot of like anxiety, insomnia, nervous system disorders. And I really was looking for a solution to fix the problem as opposed to like medicating it. So I ended up going to like 6 different doctors, just trying to get comprehensive lab testing or at least like an answer to what was going on. And as I'm sure you've heard from other people, it's really hard to get good testing. And so they would run hormone panels. They would basically do like one marker for thyroid, and they tried to give me birth control, an antidepressant, and thyroid medication. And I was just like, I don't know much about health or like medicine per se, but this doesn't feel right in my intuition. And so then I found, I guess this was a 2013, I found a functional medicine course called Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. And I took that course, got certified, and it was kind of like my eyes were opened to the possibilities of being able to heal myself. And that kind of led me down the path of then getting my master's degree in functional medicine and clinical nutrition, which really facilitated like an in-depth understanding of like pathology, biochemistry, like how all the different systems of the body work together. And then it was one of those things where like, okay, I have the knowledge, but I had no idea how to make it like a business or anything. So it really just started out with me healing my body, and then it kind of translated to me helping other people.
Neat. Yeah.
Very, very
That's a
cool.
story.
Yeah, it's a story. So just in case people don't know,
Hmm.
if you were to describe what functional medicine is, what would you say functional medicine was?
Yeah, so functional medicine, and I like to preface this with it's kind of become trendy on social media.
Yeah.
So you'll see clinics or practitioners that have taken like a weekend course and then now they offer functional medicine. And what functional medicine at a root is supposed to be is looking at the root causes as to why symptoms are coming up in your body, why they're presenting a certain way, and then structuring your nutrition, your lifestyle. This does include like supplements to some degree, biohacking, but really getting the body to a place of healing as opposed to like just shutting down the symptoms like you typically see in Western medicine.
Yeah. What do you think the most common misconceptions about
Mm.
functional medicine are?
I would say there's two big ones. The first one is that it's like kind of crunchy or kooky and
Okay.
maybe a little bit unscientific, but I would say that's really false because a lot of the research that we're using is based on clinical data, clinical research, obviously people's lab testing results and their symptoms. So I would say that's one of the biggest misconceptions. The other one would be that it's just like Western medicine and you're just replacing drugs with supplements, where people just take a bunch of supplements. And I don't think that's necessarily the case either.
Yeah.
You mean like the eight tablets that I took this morning?
I still need to take mine today. Yeah.
It's quite fascinating. Yeah, Lisa, my wife, has got me on a B12 and liver tablets and all sorts of different magnesiums and etc. So yeah, okay, that's fascinating. Well, let's dive into. So you built something called ProFit High Performance Medicine. So let's get into this. Can you just share the story about you finding ProFit as a starting place, please?
Yeah. So the journey kind of started out with I worked at Lifetime Fitness, and this was when Ainsley was like 2. So I'd been in functional medicine for like 2 to 3 years. And at the time, they were implementing lab testing. It was limited, but they still had blood panels. They had like a food sensitivity test. So I was able to do a little bit with the patients, but it was still really restrictive. You kind of had to follow their rule book. And I got really frustrated with that. I actually went completely out of the nutrition industry for a while and got some online gigs that turned out to be like, I actually worked for the functional diagnostic course that I worked for, or I originally got certified from.
Okay.
I worked for them and a couple other supplement companies in 2020. So right up until like COVID hit. And when COVID hit, all of those consulting jobs basically went away. So I was kind of put in a place where I knew I was going to start a business. I wanted to start a business, but it was now a necessity. And I didn't have money. I didn't have like an investor. I didn't have like a rule book or a playbook on how to do anything. So I really just believed that if I helped people, that it would translate to building relationships, which would translate to business eventually. And so initially I helped a lot of people for free. I remember at one point I was charging like $50 a month for nutrition coaching. And I was just trying to get people in the door, help them and learn on my own. Then I worked for another clinic that did like bioidentical hormones, peptides, longevity medicine. And that really awakened in me like a deeper passion for like, we can go even further with functional medicine using these new technologies. And so that's kind of what brought me to building ProFit as it is now.
Cool.
Very cool. And you started to get into some of the challenges you face, as obviously COVID being one. But can you just, I think for other people who are building a business who will have gone through the same thing as you, what challenges did you face? And more importantly, how have you overcome them to build this successful practice you have now?
Yeah. So in the beginning of any business, I'm sure you can relate, you really don't know what you're doing. And I think that scares a lot of people. Yeah.
Sure don't.
Yeah. And I think that scares and intimidates a lot of people. And that's kind of what shuts them off from pursuing their dream is just fear. And for me, like that was definitely a component. I was always kind of worried about like, is this going to work? Am I wasting my time? And I just would push through knowing that like deep down, I had this feeling that this was my calling. I was meant to do this. And really like learning the basics of like, well, business is foundationally at first based on me. So I really dug into self-development. I really worked on my mental and emotional responses, my stress response, which helped me then like make clear decisions. And I wasn't afraid to make mistakes. Like there's lots of mistakes I made along the way where I was like trying to grow too big too fast. And then I just had to kind of just reframe my thought process to where it's not about being big. It's not about the money. It's about the purpose and the people. And so, I lost a lot of different relationships throughout the way, and that's always really hard. But just really having that mindset inside of you that like, if there is a problem, you can figure it out. It's just about effort.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay, so I think a lot of people, when they think about functional medicine, can sometimes feel it's kind of intangible. People are unfamiliar with it. So how do you take the principles that you've got, make them actionable and relatable for your clients?
Well, I think the biggest thing we do first is like identify their biggest pain points. So, what are the symptoms that are affecting your daily life? How is this impacting you? Correlating it with their blood work and saying, like, look, if you feel this way, well, look at your labs. Like, it makes sense, and encouraging people to really listen to their intuition because our bodies are giving us signals as symptoms for a reason. And oftentimes, if you ask a patient enough questions, you can start to correlate their story from like certain points in their life where things went wrong or a big stressful event happened, or like in the veteran community, we'll see a lot of like TBIs. And so you can kind of start to correlate with like, yeah, I was blown up this one time. And now this is correlating to all these psychological and physical symptoms too. So, making it super simple and actionable as well is a big point because I have a lot of clients that come to me that went to other functional medicine practices and they're given, like you mentioned, like 20 supplements, all these different things they need to change about their lifestyle. And it's just super overwhelming because it's so much. And so one thing we do in our practice is something called habit stacking, where we'll kind of pick the biggest lever that we can pull that's going to give you the best benefit, the most like symptom relief, but also be the easiest to implement in your life. So that might be, drinking more water or adding more steps to your day or taking like one supplement as opposed to trying to overhaul everything at once.
Yeah. So can you go into your practice a little bit more? I'm really interested to hear. I mean, I'm sure you start with a blood panel of some sort or testing of some sort. And then what kind of interventions or things do you prescribe to your clients? Is it all diet? Is it diet supplements? I mean, what are you kind of known for, or what do you guys do?
Yeah, so most of my clients are doing regular blood panels because, in my opinion, that's the most scientific based testing that we can use. It's going to give us the most data about your overall health as opposed to just like one area, like a gut test is specifically for gut. And so a lot of my clients are doing at least one blood panel a year, if not one every 90 days or so. And what we do is we take that, we look at what's improving, what's not improving, and then kind of like dial it down to, okay, let's do this with your calories and macros. Let's do this with your supplements. And then we also have a doctor on staff that can do like bioidentical hormones and thyroid medications. So it really is based on first, like the person's goals, like what are they trying to achieve? How severe are their symptoms? What's their budget like? Because say, for example, a lot of people, the price tag on functional medicine is like a big limiting factor. And so you can get a blood panel for $500. Mm-hmm. And that includes a 45-minute call with me to go over all your test results and discuss like changes that you can actionably take on that call. And so really you could get access to functional medicine for $500 a year. And then kind of customizing it, adding other services, adding other labs is based on that person and what they need.
So Kelsey, I don't live near you, so I go and get my bloods done somewhere and get the results of you. Then we have that. Is that the way the process works?
Yeah. So within the US, we use LabCorp. So anybody in the US, we go to LabCorp, get those labs back. I have clients in the UK, Canada, Mexico, and South Africa. And in those areas, we just like coordinate the labs with whatever industry related, equivalent is in those places.
Okay. I love that you brought up hormone health too, because that's such a big topic, especially now with the, greater focus, thank God, on women's health with perimenopause, menopause as well. Could you go into, and not necessarily those two topics, but could you go into some of the most maybe significant benefits of hormone optimization and maybe what myths you can help us debunk that often come in with your clients?
Yes, yes. So what I'll hear a lot, especially with women, is because there was this big study, the Women's Health Initiative, and the study was proven to be not accurate. The science that they used was not great. Most of the women were quite older, had a lot of pre-existing conditions, and they also used synthetic hormones. So they would use like Premarin, which is a hormone derived from horse urine, pregnant horse urine. So you can imagine the levels of that hormone are like super high and nothing that you would have available in our size of a human body, you know?
Yeah.
But they correlated bioidentical hormones with like cancer and cardiovascular risks and things like that. And first of all, it was a terribly done study. The medications are not medications that we use now. And it created a lot of fear in the medical community where if you go to an OB or a doctor that usually works with women's health, they'll be either intimidated by hormones or they just won't do them altogether. What we need to keep in the front of our minds is like the hormones used in that clinical study was not the same hormones we use now. So the ones we use now are
bioidentical.
Right. Yeah. So bioidentical hormones are the ones we use now, which basically means like it's chemically similar to the hormones that you would make yourself. So with women, for example, there's 3 main hormones you want to focus on for balancing. It's progesterone, estrogen, and testosterone. And you really want to look at all 3 of those as opposed to just one. You'll see a lot of clinics do like the pellets. I'm not a fan of pellets at all.
Okay.
Are you familiar with pellets? Have you heard of those?
I am. Yeah.
I'm not, but it'd be great for you to explain, please.
Okay, yeah. So pellets are like the size of grain of rice and they have hormones in them. You make a little slice like in your gluteal range and insert this little insert. This insert then releases hormones supposedly slowly over time. But what we've seen clinically is these pellets can release at different rates based on your metabolism, how active you are, and that can lead to a lot of like ups and downs. So for example, you get the pellet inserted, you're going to feel really good, maybe even have negative side effects from how high the hormones are. And then before your next implantation, you're going to have really, really low lows. Whereas opposed to that, what we would do is like a combination of oral progesterone. It can also be a cream, estrogen cream, estrogen patches, and then either testosterone cream or injections for women. Now for men are off. They're kind of lucky. They have a lot easier of a time when it comes to bioidentical hormones. The big thing with them is testosterone. But there's still a lot of like negative mindsets around optimizing testosterone even in men.
Okay.
For men, ideally, we kind of want to get like their optimal ranges probably between like 800 to 1,000, depending on their size and their activity.
Okay. And then what about peptides? That's a new topic, I think, for a lot of folks. Could you go into that a little bit and maybe some myths, some positives, negatives, just what people should...
And explain them first.
And sure, explain them first.
Yeah. So peptides have gotten a lot of attention since the weight loss drugs have come out. So like the GLP-1s. And essentially a peptide is a chain of amino acids that then like codes and tells your body to do an action. So the GLP-1s that first came out acted on like one mechanism, and they would help you metabolize inflammation, blood sugar, and that would in turn help people lose weight. Well, now the new peptides coming out for GLP-1s, there's one called retatrutide, and it's a triple agonist. So now it works on like 3 different ways that you can manage like your blood sugar, your inflammation, and like insulin response. There's other peptides too. Like we use a lot of peptides with our veteran community that can help with like stimulating brain function, blood flow, and like basically resetting the brain through the peptides. And that can help them focus more, heal their brain from TBIs, PTSD. Then you have peptides in like the cosmetic side of the world as well. Like there's peptides you can take to make you more tan, or there's peptides that have like a growth hormone benefit. So that's like a longevity peptide. The really popular ones a lot of people are talking about now are like BPC 157. Have you heard of that?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So like BPC 157 and TB 500 are 2 peptides you can use to like regenerate tissue. So say, for example, I had a former NFL player in Colorado. He had a partial tear in one of his tendons in his shoulder that was going to potentially need surgery. And we put him on the BPC 157 TB 500 combo. And in 6 weeks, he went back to his doctor, and his doctor was like, what are you doing? How did you do this? How did you repair that? And a lot of it is a combination of like the peptides, getting inflammation down, and then things like testosterone too.
Are there any negatives to peptides? Has it been studied enough to know the negatives?
Well, the studies is kind of a hard question to answer, because who finances the studies is a big thing. It's really expensive to do studies, and a lot of the pharmaceutical industry is blocking and getting in the way of peptides. Back in like 2017, 2018, when peptides were kind of like in the vogue and a little bit new, you could order them online. You didn't really necessarily need a prescription. The FDA wasn't really into that world at all. But as the pharmaceutical industry kind of got word of peptides, they've made it a lot more difficult to get. So to answer your question, there's not a whole lot of studies on them, probably because of financial reasons, if that makes sense.
So Kelsey, did I get this right? Let me just see if I got this right. So there are peptides, and obviously I can't quote the number that you just quoted me, that actually healed someone's shoulder internally. So let's just say, I don't know, I had a scar, and the scar wasn't healing properly, or it wasn't looking cosmetically correct. Can I take a peptide for that?
You could try like BPC 157 and inject it locally. There's a topical peptide, GHKCU, which is a copper-based peptide, and it actually helps the tissue of your skin heal. So if you were going to do that, you might want to try a topical one for like a scar. But it really depends on the severity of the injury, like how long it's been since you've had it. But a lot of people use BPC for that purpose.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, because a lot of women have to go through a C-section, or they have to go through, various surgeries, and then it has a scar there that they don't like, etc. That was kind of really what was my question.
Yeah. For that, there's also a lot of like microneedling and radio frequency that can help the tissue heal.
Sure.
Yeah, interesting. What about this? A man actually cares about women's health, eh? That's
right? That's amazing.
It's a rare breed nowadays, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very empathetic of you.
Yeah, there you go. Isn't it funny? There's a few of us still left, thankfully.
Yeah.
So thinking about your personalized approach. So if we look at things like genetic testing and personalized approaches to nutrition, can they give people a competitive edge in their health and their performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And genetic testing, like the first thing to understand about your genetics is genetics load the gun, but your lifestyle pulls the trigger. And, the past year or so, there's been a lot of people on big podcasts and like all over social media. I'm sure you know who I'm talking about if I say too much, but he was specifically talking about like the MTHFR gene and COMT. And they would sell a genetic test that had 4 or 5 markers on it for like $700. And with genetics, it's super important to take into consideration like context of what it actually means. Just because you have a genetic SNP for a certain condition or a disease or a nutrient deficiency doesn't mean that that's going to manifest in your body. So first of all, when it comes to genetics, you want to do like a full genome map, which is your whole genome, so you can actually take into consideration all the context. Then the second thing is you want to compare your genes to what's actually happening in your body. Do you have any of these symptoms? Do you have any of these markers on your blood test? And then using that information, we can then decide, okay, what action items do we need to take based on your genes? So for example, we can get a lot of insight into how to structure your diet. So macronutrient wise, like how do you process fats? How do you process carbs? And one thing I think is really interesting about what's happening in, I guess, nutrition trendiness right now is the carnivore diet. And I think this might be appropriate for certain people at certain times of their life, but there's a lot of people that don't do well with high saturated fat. They also don't do well with super high protein because of how they methylate or detox sulfur. So it is one of those things where we can really customize your diet a lot easier if we have genetics.
And did you get that through blood work?
It's actually a cheek swab. So I charge $700 for the test, and you get everything from that test, from like disease risk factors, nutritional risk factors, even like how certain medications might react in your body. And it's just a cheek swab you do at home. The test results do take about 4 to 6 weeks, but then you and I spend like 45 minutes on the phone going over all the major SNPs or changes in your DNA that might be impacting you.
And sorry, do you guys touch on food sensitivity, or is that something maybe not? Because if the body's already inflamed, it could come awry a little bit with that. What do you guys do for that type of stuff?
That's a really great question because I get that a lot. And with food sensitivity, that's not high on my priority list if they're already inflamed and they have gut issues. So say, for example, like early in my career, food sensitivity was like super popular and people would get their results back and everything they ate on a regular basis would be in the red. And they'd be like, what do you mean? I can't have eggs. I can't have chicken. I can't have green beans, these like random things. And what's important to know with food sensitivity testing is you can have false positives that are just foods that you eat frequently. Also, if your gut is already inflamed and not working properly, then you're also going to get a ton of false positives. So I usually don't do a food sensitivity test until we've done a gut test, which is like a stool test. And that will show us like your microbiome balance, inflammation in the gut, your gallbladder, liver, digestive function. And we get all that fixed first. And then we can do a food sensitivity test later on.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. There's a bunch of people who are probably listening to this who've either got clients or family members or themselves who suffer from things like chronic fatigue or energy issues, low energy. So what factors are people missing out on or commonly overlooked? And how do you approach addressing these issues?
Yeah, so with fatigue, the big thing is first mitochondria and mitochondrial health. So those are the little powerhouses of your cells, and they can be super sensitive or not work as well as they could with like nutrient deficiencies, high levels of inflammation, stress, heavy metals, even like infections from like bad bacteria or parasites. And so the first step is always like mitochondrial function. How is that going? Then it would be a combination of like, let's look at your blood sugar levels. Are you having like big spikes and big dips because of either your stress or maybe you do fasting and you only eat in the latter half of the day, which sometimes doesn't work well for people. We also want to consider like their stress burden on their nervous system, which I think a lot of Americans can relate to. A lot of us are really in the fight or flight side of our nervous system and kind of stuck there. And so we have to kind of teach the body to come back to center to where we can actually balance the rest and digest side of your nervous system and the fight or flight. Hormones obviously play a huge role there as well, kind of depending on what phase of life you're in. There's a lot we can do to optimize your hormones for energy too.
Okay. Where does sleep factor in? I mean, I'm sure you can ask the question, how are you sleeping? But then what certain protocols can help with that?
Yeah, so sleep customization is like really important because you'll have certain people that can't necessarily control their sleep patterns. Like I work with a lot of first responders, firefighters, military, and for them, like they might have a night shift all the time or several times during the week, or they have a mission that they're on and sleep isn't really a priority. So what we do in those cases is like optimize the environment around the sleep that they do get. So things like eliminating blue light at certain times of the day, doing things like EMF protection, like blocking some of the frequencies that can keep their body stimulated, really making sure their nutrition is on point. So like their calories, their macros, so we take away that blood sugar factor. And then I love using devices. So like the Oura Ring, the Garmin, and sometimes when people just see how much sleep they're not getting or what their REM quality of sleep looks like, it's really interesting and then helps them implement a lot of changes. One big thing too that a lot of people don't want to talk about is how things like cannabis or alcohol can really negatively impact sleep too. So we're always kind of looking at those little things we can tweak too.
Sure.
It's an interesting one because I often hear people say that alcohol helps them sleep better.
Well, it might help you fall asleep, but when you look at the quality of their sleep, the REM sleep, where they're really getting that restorative rest, is going to be significantly decreased with alcohol.
Yeah, it's more of a pass out.
It's kind of interesting is that on a previous podcast episode, we chatted about this, but I've been going through some neuro brain training as a result of some concussion issues, etc. And it's fascinating. I've been going every time I go, they say, what have you noticed is different? Are you focusing better, etc.? The one thing I've really noticed is it's helped me sleep.
Nice.
It's really helping me sleep, the quality of my sleep score, my REM, my deep sleep it's quite fascinating.
Yeah, I would love to hear your story about your TBI. How long ago was it that you had one?
I've had many of them. I was also a soccer player, and I
Mm,
was a defender, so I constantly headed the ball. So my brain
yeah.
was, so they weren't always. I've been through a couple of car windscreens too on my bike, that and skiing. Anyway, we won't get into all that detail.
Yeah.
But there's been quite a few of them as a result of it.
Yeah.
So the biggest effect, I found out that I'd got focal epilepsy. As a result,
Wow.
I did an EEG. They put me on a drug, which to be fair has worked. It stopped the issues, but after a while, I've been advised that even if I up the dose, eventually the brain will get used to it. So I'm trying
Mm,
something new in terms of this is it neurofeedback training? It's
Hmm.
called
Yeah.
neurofeedback
yeah.
training, which is the weirdest thing in the world, but it seems to
It's
be
pretty
from a
neat.
sleep point of view, because Lauren's
Yeah.
been trying it too. Quite fascinating.
Yeah, we use that a lot with veterans too, or even
Mm.
like my husband, I call him my husband, but he played rugby, professional rugby for like 16 years. And there is
Yeah.
a lot of cool new technology like the neurofeedback, even like the I guess they call it where they've like trained the muscles around your eyes. I can't remember
Okay.
what the name of it is, but there's a
I don't
lot
know.
of really cool stuff.
Neat.
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought up first responders, because I think that's such an interesting subpopulation that you could, draw similarities from athletes to everyday folks in, this high stress environment that we live in. How do
Mm-hmm.
you help those clients and maybe some others that are similar balance between performance, right? Because they have to be on all the time, and
Yeah.
then recovery. And we started to talk about that with sleep a little bit, but could you go into that a little bit more?
Yeah, so it usually is a combination of modalities, right? So we try to look at like their environment. So how's the air quality? How's like the lights in your room? Like let's focus on like dimming the lights at certain times of the day. And a lot of it comes down to like customizing things to calm the nervous system and then having a routine. If you have a routine, you can actually kind of train your brain to get used to like, okay, when I brush my teeth and I do my skincare, I'm now going to go to sleep. And a big part of it is like really digging into like what their routine looks like and saying like, all right, after you do your skincare, you don't need to go scroll on TikTok for an hour.
Mm,
You need to like
yeah.
shut your brain down. So one thing I do with first responders and like my high level CEO type personalities is I have them do gratefulness journaling before bed, because your brain cannot actually feel grateful and anxious at the same time. So we do like gratefulness journaling, and I have them write down the action items they need to do for the next day by priority. So that alleviates a lot of that like ruminating thoughts where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't forget to do this. I can't forget to do that. And if they write it down, often you can calm the brain down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does meditation come into play at all in your practice?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
It's actually on like every one of my protocols is a combination of like meditation, mindfulness, gratefulness, because of not only the mental side of things, but your nervous system, like your vagus nerve, for example.
Just change the subject a little bit. Is that one of the things that we focus on this podcast is perspective. So I'm already fascinated by everything you've said. Don't understand half of it, but I'm getting there. What's fascinating is that there's so much noise out there in the wellness industry and the health and fitness industry. How do you help your clients differentiate, let's say, between credible science and wellness trends?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I always tell them is if it looks like an ad, it probably is. And so you'll see a lot of people like promoting like colostrum or a supplement on social media, and people are like sending me messages, do I need this? Do I need this? And I'm like, don't buy a supplement because you saw an ad for it. Figure out what your body needs, what's going on inside of you, and then customize your protocol to it. And also like anything that feels manipulative to your emotions or makes you feel like fear or like insecurity, like those things are marketing tactics. And if you can kind of differentiate between what your body actually needs and what someone's trying to sell you, I think you'll have a lot better of a time figuring things out.
And is there a good ad? Is there a good way of doing it?
Yeah, I think there could be good and better ways to do it. I think if you don't appeal to the people in a way that feels manipulative, as opposed to just saying like, hey, this really helped me with this, I think that's a lot less salesy than if you have this gene snip, you have to take this supplement or you're going to die. You know what I mean?
Mm. Hurry up and do this one
So
thing. Yeah.
storytelling and testimonials and professional advice is probably better, is what you're saying.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. The other topic I hear a lot of about nowadays is gut health. So it seems a hot topic at the moment. Again, there's probably a lot of misinformation. Are there actually science-backed ways to improve your gut health that a lot of people aren't aware of?
Well, I'll start with one that I think most people are aware of, but for some reason it's become trendy so like the carnivore diet, for example, like they'll say plants are bad for you. You don't need fiber. You don't need plants. And I will say, after running a lot of gut tests on people that have tried this approach, when you don't feed your gut microbiome the good bacteria with fiber, they die. And that is part of your immune system. That's part of the way your body makes vitamins. That's how a lot of inflammation is controlled. And so, first of all, you need fiber. I think that's a big misconception in the world today. Then another thing that I get a lot of clients tell me is they'll have all these gut issues like heartburn, bloating, indigestion, just IBS type stuff. They'll go to the doctor. The doctor will do a scope. They'll look all throughout their systems and they'll be like, you're fine. And they're like, but I'm not fine. And what's not offered to them is the kind of like stool testing that we do, where we can see how your bacteria levels are. Do you have parasites? Do you have leaky gut? How all your digestive system's functioning? And I think that's another misconception is people just feel like, well, I have IBS, I'm going to live with it forever. And I think there's a lot more we can do for them.
So I'm just going to can you just talk a little bit more about the microbiome? It's a very topical thing, and I'm not sure everyone totally understands why that's so important.
Yeah, so I like to say we have a lot more bacteria cells in our body than we have human cells. And that is very true. Like the bacteria in our body modulate a lot of our different systems. And so what your microbiome is, well, first of all, you have microbiomes everywhere. So you have like a brain microbiome, you have like an oral microbiome, you have a gut microbiome, you have lymphatic system. But the main one that most people are talking about is your gut. And you have good bacteria that are there to help you digest your food, make vitamins. And you also have, at some degree, bad bacteria. Everybody has them. What happens and where the problems usually arise is where the good bacteria get significantly outnumbered by the bad bacteria. And that's where you get like inflammation, IBS, constipation, and kind of the whole realm of gut health kind of starts with the microbiome. This can also be complicated by like things like yeast or parasites that then further disrupt the microbiome. So essentially it's a balance of bacteria that we want to keep in a healthy range.
Sure.
Okay.
What's one piece of advice or a practice that you recommend to clients that might surprise listeners out there?
The biggest thing I would say is listen to your intuition. Okay. And that comes to like when you're at a regular medical doctor, whether you're working with a functional medicine person, whether it's your personal trainer, your nutritionist, because if they can ask you the right questions and something resonates with you, that's usually your body confirming that, yes, this is something you either need to change or look into.
Yeah. Okay. And then I kind of want to bring this to life a little bit, and obviously don't want to breach confidentiality or talk about anyone specific that they'd be listening and be like, hey, what the heck? But would you mind sharing a client success story that highlights the transformation of the potential of functional medicine? Just something to bring this to life.
Yeah. I actually have a case study where he allows me to talk specifically about him and like give his information. So his name's John Richards. He was an 11-year Navy SEAL out of Virginia Beach. And I have a really big passion for veterans because I feel like it's a very underserved community. Everyone thinks because they're big, tough guys that, you know, they don't need anything and they're good. But he actually was in the teams for 11 years. He was what's called a master breacher. So he was around in close proximity to a lot of explosions for the majority of his career. And what started to happen is he was on a mission, he was in the hotel, and he lost consciousness. So he like fully passed out. hit his head on the countertop and was like bleeding out. And luckily his roommate was a medic, so they got him all fixed up. You know, he said that he told the doctors, "Oh, I just drank too many energy drinks," even though he kind of knew something was up. Fast forward, they're doing a mission in the water. He loses consciousness underwater, so he like floats to the top. He's unconscious, not breathing. And what they're taught to do with their buddies is like when one loses buoyancy, they like pull them back down, you know? And so his buddy didn't realize he was unconscious, and he pulled him back under, and that John started to drown. Luckily, like his buddy noticed like, hey, something's not right, got him to the top. And that's what led to him being med boarded, is what they call it, where they're medically retired. And so I met John, he's 34. I met him when he was going through this med board process like 2 or 3 years ago. And he started to describe to me all the symptoms that he was having with like trouble losing weight, trouble sleeping. He would wake up in the middle of the night and like eat everything in the kitchen and wake up the next morning and not remember it. He couldn't sleep at all. Like his metabolism was just really weird. Like he knew how to eat, he knew how to train. He was having like panic attacks. So like the PTSD component was coming out too. So we ran blood work on him. And I remember doing the lab review with him, and I was like, John, like your testosterone's like 200 or 300 and your insulin is far above pre-diabetic, and your cortisol is all over the place, and your vitamin levels are super low. And we could just start to see everything make sense in terms of like why his body was reacting this way. So there's something called operator syndrome. And you'll see this in veterans, you'll see this in like first responders, firefighters, where they have this very specific group of symptoms that influence like their blood sugar, their cortisol, their nervous system, their hormones, and then in turn, like inflammation gets kicked up too. And so what we did is we took his information, we made him a nutrition protocol. So on the SEAL teams, they actually have dietitians that are like super awesome. But for him specifically, we had to change his diet. We actually changed a lot of his carb sources. We lowered his carbs. We increased his fat and his protein. I actually told him to eat more calories, believe it or not. So we did that with his nutrition. His training was like super intense. Like he would lift like long workouts, heavy weights, a lot of the days out of the week. So we dialed that back so we could give his nervous system a little bit of a break. And we front loaded his sleep with a good protein rich meal. On the medical side, so we do have doctors on staff that prescribe things like hormone replacement, peptides. We got him on a couple peptides, which I don't really disclose that because that's, you know, personal to the individual. But we got him on a couple peptides as well as testosterone, and his body completely transformed. He lost 15 pounds of fat, not just like 15 pounds, 50 pounds of actual fat that we tracked.
Yeah.
He had to get all new clothes because like his pants and his belts and stuff didn't fit anymore. He texted me a couple days ago that he's maxed out his deadlift, and he's like over 500 pounds on his deadlift now.
Good for him. Yeah.
He actually, when we were going through this process, was struggling with numbing his pain with drugs. And so he actually got completely off of those. To where now like he has this amazing job. He's making the money that he deserves to be making. He loves his job. His family with his kids are great. Like he's got a great relationship with his boys. So there is just a really powerful, you know, aspect of functional medicine where we can help restore people back to what they should be.
So Kelsey, just picking up on one thing from that, you talked about he had this emergency situations. So he would be, I mean, I've started watching this incredible show called The Pit, which is all about the ER, incredible show. And you watch it and they always talk about the emergency patient comes in, they go, order this panel. Are they ordering a panel like you're talking about that's checking everything, or are they just doing a specific thing for the specific problem they think is happening? What's happening there?
Yeah, so in that scenario, they're probably looking at like vital signs. They're probably looking at like a CMP, which is going to show like maybe their electrolytes or their sodium potassium ratios, or like inflammation that's like emergent. So what they're doing is like completely different than what we would do in a comprehensive panel. Because first of all, like emergency medicine, you're going to need their help. Whatever drug they need, whatever they need to save your life, you need that at the time. But for us, we're more so looking at like how everything's working in conjunction with each other, or like what deficiencies we can fix with lifestyle and nutrition. So it is very different. And with my blood panels, I can actually add like any marker to it that you like. So say, for example, you have a health history of like a autoimmune disorder or a health history of cardiovascular disease, then there's things we can add to the test to specify what we're looking for you.
And is it starting to happen now that there's cooperation here? So you've got the emergency type things going on, and then they're getting recommended to go to see a functional medicine doctor. Is that happening?
To some degree, with open-minded providers, yes. Other providers are really hesitant to it just because maybe they don't understand it, or they've never been taught how it works, or they've never had experience with it with a client. So for me, I actually get a lot of referrals from a couple OBGYNs, a couple doctors that know I do things they don't do. But that's because I actually helped the doctor first. So it's usually like the doctor came to me, I helped them, and then they send me patients.
That makes complete sense. Yeah, that seems like a big opportunity for healthcare generally all over the world. So, okay. So what excites you most about the future of functional medicine and this personalized healthcare? And are there any emerging technology or methods you're really excited to integrate into your practice?
So I'm really hopeful that we can change the bureaucracy and kind of the money fueling what's available to us. So I'm hoping with the new administration that we can get like some of the peptides legalized to where we actually have access to them. A couple years ago, the FDA shut down the availability for a lot of the peptides. So I'm hoping that we can kind of get that fixed and have a lot more freedom in that way. There's also things called Russian bioregulators. Have you heard of those?
No.
So in America, they're not really talked about. They're not really promoted. But in Russia, they've been studying these things for over 40 years. Like these are things that they've used with like astronauts and military and like high performers. And what it is, it's like a shorter chain peptide. So it's similar to the peptides we talked about, but they are made from natural sources. So say like if you're going to do something for your adrenal glands, it might be made from an adrenal gland of an animal, and you take that and it helps your body on an epigenetic level. So you have like your genes, right? Well, the epigenetic level is like how those genes turn on and off based on what's your lifestyle like, or the bioregulators that you're taking. So I think there's going to be a lot of cool research and hopefully even like cures for things that can come out of the Russian bioregulators.
That's fascinating.
Interesting. I've never heard of it.
Fascinating. What are some of the common mistakes you see people make in the pursuit of health, and how do you guide them to just make better choices?
Well, I think the biggest thing is like they'll see someone talk about this diet worked for me, and so then they go try that diet, as opposed to looking at like, well, what actually works for you as an individual. I think that's a big one. And then sometimes you'll see like functional medicine accounts on social media, and they'll have like 500,000 followers or 1 million followers. And then you look at how much they charge. They'll charge you like $6,000 or $12,000 just to get started with them. And that turns a lot of people off because that's their first experience with functional medicine. And they're like, well, I can never access this. I'll never have that kind of money. And then they just don't think functional medicine is accessible to them. And so I like to encourage people that there is access to functional medicine that you can make affordable. You just have to find someone that's actually in it for helping people as opposed to just taking advantage of sick people.
Sure. So to wrap this all up, this has been very fascinating.
Yeah, really interesting.
Before we ask our final question, if a listener could implement just one change today to improve their health, what would you recommend they do?
I would say get a blood panel at least once a year. And
I guessed you were going to say that.
Yeah.
I guessed you were going to say that. Yeah. That makes sense. How would you know? How can you make any changes if you don't know what's going on?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's in our world, it's almost like you don't do blood work unless there's something wrong. And I think we should be more proactive and say, well, I want to make sure everything's actually going as great as it can be. And there's even like some doctors that if you go to them and just specifically ask, they'll run more comprehensive panels through your insurance and things like that. So you can get it maybe even at a cheaper price through your insurance. For us, for example, we take flex spending and health savings accounts from insurance for your labs. So that's also an option, but really just getting that at least one blood panel a year. And then the secret there, though, is who's reading it. So if you get a blood panel through insurance, through your doctor, they're probably going to tell you everything is normal because they're just looking for you to have an immediate need, like an emergency, like we talked about earlier. If there's no emergency or no medication they can give you for something on your labs, they're just going to tell you everything's normal. So who's looking at your labs and interpreting them really makes a big difference too.
It's really great advice. So the last question that we ask everybody on this podcast is with one of our pillars, and that has to do with kindness. So is there someone in your life you would like to give a shout out to, someone who you'd like to acknowledge that has deeply influenced or inspired your journey?
Yeah, that would be my best friend, Caitlin. She's actually in the functional medicine space too. She works at the lab where I order a lot of my tests from. And I just remember specifically in 2020 calling her crying because I was afraid I wasn't going to be able to pay my bills because I didn't have any more work, coming in. And every time that I've had something come up where I've been discouraged or I've been stressed out or I've been worried I couldn't figure something out, she was always like the solid foundation and encourager that would just be like, no, like you can do this. You're meant to do this. And I just would not be here without her today.
Just quickly before you sign off, don't forget to visit network.allwellco.com and join our professional network. You'll get to enjoy exclusive benefits from brands we love and have access to a community where learning and professional development are always at the forefront of everything we do.